Okay, greetings everyone. As translation -1, today we here have two guests that I'm going to introduce you first. The first guest is Jeff Kahrs, or Jeffrey Kahrs. He is a poet, author and editor, having lived in Istanbul from 1993 to 2011. He was born in The Hague, Netherlands, and raised in California. He earned his bachelor's degree in dramatic literature from UC Santa Cruz and MA from Boston University, where he studied with Derek Walcott and Leslie Epstein. In 1988, Jeff helped found a reading series in Seattle called Radio Free Leroy's, which ran for 6 years. He taught English in its myriad forms in Istanbul. He co-edited an issue of the Atlanta Review on Poetry in Turkey, was published in Subtropics, Mediterranean.nu, and had a chapbook he published through Goldwake Press. He also co-edited a section of the Turkish magazine Çevirmenin Notu on English language poets in Istanbul, and he was published in Talisman, a journal of contemporary poetry and poetics. And also he has worked on expat poetry. He is one of the winners of 2012 Nazım Hikmet Poetry Competition. Thank you for coming here today.
My pleasure.
My next guest is Donny Smith. He's grown up in US, now teaches in Istanbul. He's a poet and a translator who has been living in Istanbul for quite some time, as far as we know, at least. Donny Smith's books of translations include Pigeon Woman by Cemal Süreya, translated with
Abbas Karakaya.
Yeah. I too went to The Hunt of a Deer by Lale Müldür, and If Cutting Off the Head of the Gorgon by Wenceslao Maldonado.
Very good.
He teaches at AI school in Istanbul. Thank you for coming too.
Thank you for inviting.
And now we've got a couple of questions for you. Let's start then. We have known you as a member of an expat literary circle in Istanbul. We believe writing and reading poetry is important in the lives of non-Turkish Anglophone residents in Istanbul. What do you think is the relation between the poet and the place? And in particular, how has Istanbul influenced you and your poetry? Let's start with you.
Okay. There's many types of poetry. Some you don't really need a place for. They are based on the language. And so they're very movable, but often much more abstract. For myself, a place was always very important. And Istanbul is one of those rare places in the world that's like the hub on a wheel from which the spokes of the world come in, whether it's Central Asia or Iran or India or the Middle East or North Africa, Europe. And so I was fortunate enough in my time here in Istanbul to be able to see all this happening after the fall of the Soviet Union and experience the cosmopolitan nature, which has actually been the rule rather than the exception for Constantinople, Istanbul, for almost not quite 2,000 years, but quite near to that. It has been a big influence on my writing, as those who've read it know, and the sense of place, the sense of being in Turkey and in the cosmopolitan center, which is where as an expatriate is certainly probably the most comfortable place, just because it's more blended, has a lot of different things going on, and the joys and fears and all the things that happen in our lives when we're living in another country, and it has been a great influence on me in many, many ways. Whether the language, the culture. My wife's Turkish. I I've loved my time in the country, not always loved it. Sometimes I had a terrible time, but that's true wherever you are. And it's made for some of my best work.
My work is probably the opposite of Jeff's. My poetry tends to be very interior, not based on where I am, but more my internal landscape. But the poets that I've translated have had a big influence on me, especially in syntax. Turkish syntax is very flexible. English, not so much, but the more I read in Turkish, the more my English syntax has gotten less English and more flexible. It's hard to hold on to meaning, though, in English and place words in different parts of the sentences, but working on that. The language has influenced me more than the city itself.
Okay, the second one. Jeff, in your poetry we find a very interesting and alternative depiction of Istanbul and Turkey. Unlike many poets who depict the city by means of mystic perspectives and Orientalist views, your poetry reveals the human, local and cosmopolitan structures and patterns of the city. For those of your viewers who have not read your poetry, could you briefly tell us how you see Istanbul?
Well, I try most of all, when I'm writing about Istanbul, I don't want to romanticize it, first of all. Istanbul is a huge city. It's teeming with people. Sometimes it's very dirty. People are not polite. There are a lot of things in Istanbul, and that's just part of the life here. And I'd never had a goal when I have written about Istanbul or Turkey. What I've merely tried to do is depict from the perspective of my life the place around me, and how it exists, how the people act, and there's good and bad everywhere. And the key thing for me has always been to try to not, I was romantically involved with Istanbul and still am, but not to romanticize the life, to try to see it as clearly as I can from, all perspectives. Yeah.
And how about you?
I find myself falling into those traps a lot, the Orientalist traps of I'm in this city that is the complete opposite of everything I know, that is somehow represents a thing that is not me. And then I have to dig myself back out of those and actually come back to reality. It's difficult not to fall into those things.
Yeah, because they are everywhere, the elements.
Yeah, and just to add to what Donny said, if you're an expatriate, you're always, whether you speak really good Turkish like Donny or me with a kind of a useful Turkish, you're still, the other. You're still not Turkish. You're living in the society and culture, and you really do have to be very careful to try to. It's not just Orientalism. It's also people have a really bad attitudes sometimes, and to try to see life as is, as opposed to what you wish it would be, or what it's been. Nostalgia for old buildings, when in fact people want modern buildings, things that work. I remember.
I do love to see the gecekondos in my neighborhood, but when I point them out to the Turks, like, oh, that house is so beautiful, they're like, would you want to live there? Actually, no, I'm fine with my apartment building.
Yeah.
But the gecekondos are beautiful. But Yes, no, I don't want to live there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, Donnie's point is right. I mean, trying to, I mean, on one hand, seeing life very practically. We want to live in a building that's comfortable. And I look at the older buildings like here in Ketikoi in the area I'm staying in, and I love it. I like the older architecture and all that. But unless it's been completely reconditioned or something,
Unless you're fabulously wealthy.
That's right. Yeah. You got to be really well off to do that. And Donnie was telling me, he bought a place out in Ataşehir, and that's because it was reasonable, because the price was right, the building was new, and he could afford it. If he tried to buy one of these antique buildings in Ketikoi, the price goes way up. So this is, I was walking down Bahariye, yesterday, actually trying to find where we were going to be so I wouldn't have to think about it in the morning. And I passed this building that is in my mind in some ways so Turkish. On the bottom was the old wooden Ottoman architecture. And on the top was like this super modern part that had just been kind of stuck on it. Now, in America, we would say, oh, that's terrible because, you're ruining this older building by putting this new, very modern piece that doesn't fit properly. But it's a good metaphor. Not only is it a good metaphor for Turkey itself, the idea of the older and then the new kind of sprouting out of it suddenly, but also it's very practical. It means that it was an inexpensive way to use the older building, which they couldn't get rid of because of the laws, and put something new in, which was useful. And according to our aesthetics, that might be ugly. But on the other hand, if you look at it from a purely practical viewpoint, from the viewpoint of the society here, it's an answer to a problem. It's a solution. And that is, how do I make money, use this space, and yet preserve the building? So these are things that, we are trained to kind of disdain, but I think maybe understanding is, and Donny, I think, would agree probably. Yeah.
That's a very good answer, by the way. Jeff, in an editorial note you wrote in Çevirmenin Notu, Translator's Note Literary Magazine, you said that the poets John Ash, Nell Canny, and yourself comprise an Istanbul school of poetry. What was your response to this, and what characterizes your poetry so that it may lead to the idea of such a school?
Well, I really don't know what's going on now. Donny, are there any young poets, expatriate poets working right now?
A few.
The
Bosphorus Review people.
Oh yeah, okay. So it's good to know. I don't know the Bosphorus Review people because that started after I left. I'm talking about an older generation. I mean, John and Mel are about 10 years older than me. I think Mel must be 73 now or something, and John, he's up there somewhere too. So when they were here, because they're not in Istanbul either anymore, so this Istanbul school, I use that only in reference like the New York school, where you had these wonderful writers, Jimmy Schuyler or John Ashbery or Kenneth Cook and Frank O'Hara. That's kind of the core of it, isn't it? And they were great writers, but none of them wrote like each other. They were called a school, but it was like a school of individual identity because none of them looked exactly like each other. Maybe John and my writing had more similarity than Mel's, who tended to work very slim. But when I said that, I didn't mean to suggest there's a similarity like, the Garip school or, even then though, the Turkish schools, the writing is very different, from one writer, Edip Cansever to Cemal Surya or, something like that. The writing's quite different. So we say schools, but now I would say, no, there's no school. I just hope there's other young writers working in Istanbul in prose. I just got a book though, of somebody who called Not Istanbul, and written by someone who was living here from like 2011 to 14 or something like that. And it's a novel, and it's very interesting to read it. One of the things they did is they, rather than give Turkish names, they translated them literally, which is something I enjoyed, and I did in one of my earlier poems. And actually that was published here. And so people are still using Istanbul as a well to create from. And that's what great cities should do, is offer that. I don't know, but school, nah, I'm afraid school's out. What do you think, Don?
One of the interesting things is there are many more Turks writing in English now.
Oh, way more.
Yeah.
Way more. When I first came to Turkey in '93, just, there were not many people except in the Kapalı Çarşı maybe, or, those areas that knew more than 100 words of English. And now, because of the education system, Donny and I participated in.
Some of my students write better in English than I do. So, and that's, if you want an international audience, that's what you have to do. Or find a good translator.
Yeah.
Our next question. As far as we have seen in your works, both of you are quite knowledgeable about Turkish poetry and literature. Can you name your favorite poet or writer in Turkish literature? And is there a movement or a particular author that influenced or inspired your works, and in what way?
Why don't you start that?
Well, the ones that I've translated, that's usually why I've translated them, because they have affected me somehow. Cemal Süreya, first of all. Lale Buldur, second of all. The Garip poets, especially. Those would be the main ones. And now I'm working on Ahmet Hashim. I really like him. And his prose, I like his prose even more than his poetry.
Yeah.
I mean, unlike Donny, I don't really, I can't consider myself a real translator, because I've translated some, but it's not, Donny really translated a lot. I'm encouraging him to actually put together a book of his stuff of Turkish poetry, because I think he's translated 200 poems, so or more, we don't even know how many, so I want him to do this either alone or with our friend Derek, who was here for many years, is a wonderful poet and translator himself. And I'm not in that school. I came to Turkey late in life. My Turkish is okay, but really it doesn't compare. They have the knowledge of the structure and syntax and all that. But one person I translated, for instance, that I really enjoyed translating was Gülten Akın. I don't know, it's funny, you just feel, you translate somebody and you feel an affinity for them. And for some reason, the language just comes out, the way you want it to. And then you know that you have a relationship. On the other hand, Nejat, yeah, he gave me the horrors.
I can't handle it.
Yeah, he was really hard, because his language was somehow really abstract and really hard to put together. So I don't, if I did him again, boy, I'd have to be patient with myself. But the usual writers, you find out things like Yaşar Kemal, one of the old timers I knew. He said, Yaşar Kemal is actually a poet writing prose, is what he said. And you can tell from the thickness of the translation, usually by Hilda Kemal, who was his wife, is really, really good. I mean, kind of thick language. And, of course, Nazim Hikmet, you can never ignore him. But recently I was rereading translations of Enes Batur that had come out a few years ago. And I actually really enjoyed them. I had forgotten them, and I was reading to prepare myself for this trip, actually. And, it was really good. What I'm really waiting, though, is for Donny to give me some of his books of translation,
Hopefully.
which he tells me are buried in locked vaults, and he's trying to get the combination for it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
If you want advice as a translator, pick your publisher very carefully. You want good distribution. And most of my books, they exist, they were published. Can you get them? No. Distribution is very important.
I'm counting on having an inside.
Yeah, but that shouldn't be the way it is. You should just be able to walk into a bookstore and say, I want
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And Donny, could you tell us about your translations of Turkish literature? Do you have any interesting translators' experiences about translating Turkish literature?
I can tell you my main problem as a translator, which is overreading. Like, I will fixate on some word or phrase or allusion, and I'll decide it must be really, really important, and I'll do weeks of research on it, and I'll think, oh, this is the most profound thing ever in the world. And then I'll show it to a native speaker, and they'll go, no, that's just, it means what it means. It's like pencil, or, it means nothing, basically. And I did all that research, and I built this huge tower of meaning out of it, and it means nothing. Idioms, also very bad at. I don't always recognize idioms, and I translate them literally, and then I don't understand what this means. It's very mysterious. The poem must be a mystery. And again, I show it to a native speaker, and they go, that means this.
Yeah, idioms are like really hard. I mean, how would you translate, a Shekhoshavtan or something into English, fruit compote? I mean, what the heck is that? We don't even eat it anymore, so very, very hard. It's interesting Donny said this because in working with the group here, I noticed that is exactly, people would ponder something for a long time and they get stuck on it, and where, what I meant was really simple. It was just like, hey, it's an apple.
Yeah.
It's on a tree. It has nothing to do with Adam and Eve.
Yes, that's exactly it. We were just discussing Kolumu Kanadımı Kurdum and how to translate that. I spent weeks with my collaborator on that line, and we still don't have anything good to show for it. I broke my arm, my wing.
It's like if you spend a lot of time on Kodumu Otuturun, yeah? What does that really mean? Do they really mean slap? Is this a misogynist statement? Or, you spend a lot of time, it's just a terrible thing, It's like it doesn't deserve much investment, but it's hard to judge that.
Yes, as a non-native speaker, you can't judge the weight of certain expressions very easily.
And you get lost in them.
And you get stuck.
When literary translation is in question, especially when talking about poetry translation, the concept of translatability comes up. Some say translation of poetry is not possible because much gets lost in translation. Some say it is translatable only if the translator is a poet, so the discussion ends up focusing on what is lost in translation. What do you think about translatability of poetry or literary translation? And as opposed to the notion of lost in translation, do you believe in windows, doors, bridges, journeys through literary translation?
Many of the metaphors that are used for translation have this moral element to them that I think causes people problems then in their translating. A lot of them are metaphors of, for instance, faithfulness, as though the poem were your wife and you were cheating on her, or the famous traduttore, translator traitor. I can't say the Italian. Like the original poem is your homeland, and you are committing treason by translating it. Or the original poem is a woman, and you have done something bad to her. Or most of the metaphors have some moral element to them, and the really enlightening thing for me was reading Antoine Berman, the French translator. He has a really good article. His name I can't remember.
I wrote it down.
Translations and the Trials of the Foreign. Very good. Where he talks about the psychological aspects of translating, and ends with an idea that was really freeing for me, which is that every translation is a way of deforming a text. If you translate, you will deform the text. You will create a monster. And then he lists all the various different ways that you can deform a text. And basically, you have to accept that you're going to create a monster and just decide which parts of what kind of monster are you going to create. This kind or that kind. And once you accept that, then it doesn't become such a big problem. No, you can't recreate a poem in another language. It's impossible. The very act of changing words, you've already ruined it. All you can do is create something that maybe or maybe not will be acceptable to your readers. You have to know what kind of readers you have, what they expect from a translation. You have to know what you as a translator are capable of. For instance, I can't do rhyme. So if I translate a sonnet, a Turkish sonnet into English, I can't make it rhyme. Okay, well, I accept that. It's not going to rhyme. I've ruined that part of the language. I can bring over something else, though. And as long as I accept that my new thing is going to be somehow deformed, it's okay. But even the greatest translations are deformed in some way, no matter how ingenious they are.
And how do you think a translation of a poem becomes acceptable? Do you decide on that? Do your readers decide on that? Or is there collaboration?
In English, the norm is that it should read like a poem, an English poem, and the reader should not suspect that it's translated. There are a lot of translators who reject that. I rejected that at the beginning of my translating work, but I've also found when I translate the way I want to translate, it doesn't get published. So over the years, I've gradually softened and okay, I will make a new poem that looks like an English poem, and then it gets published. It's kind of interaction between writer and reader. You do what you can.
I think, that when I had a translation class back when I was in graduate school, I had it with a woman named Roberta Penn Warren. She was the daughter of a very famous poet, Robert Warren. Yeah, in his time, more in the 40s, 50s, kind of epic. Did a lot of epic work, but good, good writer. And she's a poet, and she was also a classicist. And so she knew Greek and Latin, and she wrote poems in English. And our class was split between the poets, or the members of the writing workshops, and the classicists. And it was like a battle royale. Should it be meaning, or should it be a poem, kind of? And I think she stood in the middle of it, which is actually, I think, probably where you should be, is somewhere towards the middle.
Did any of the classicists read Louis Zukowski?
No.
because he did something completely different. He translated only the sounds from Latin into English. So the poem would sound the same from Latin to English, but have totally different meaning.
No,
Which, is the work of genius. But
yeah, that's right. It's working on a whole different level, and it's a concept. It's laboratory poetry, which is valuable.
On the other hand, like if a lot of, for instance, it used to be in English, if you translated a poem in, let's say a French sonnet, which is in six hexameters or something.
Yeah, 12 syllable lines.
You had to translate it into a Petrarchan sonnet of 5 iambic pentameters.
Right.
In English. There was no choice. Like those were seen as equivalent.
Right.
Which is just ridiculous, but that was the convention.
Sure, because the iambic pentameter was the standard for English, and the hexamic, whatever.
The Alexandrine.
Whatever 12 syllable line was the standard in French. And they said, oh, well, because this is the classical standard and this is the classical standard, you want to do this and do this. Because the Shahnameh rhymes, you want to make it rhyme in English. In 19th century, if you look up the Shahnamehs, they're all rhyming, and they're all based on the 19th century ideas of rhyming endings, couplet forms, and things like that. But really, what we want in modern writing is something very different. We're not demanding these things. We're saying what's going to work for this poem. That's the most important thing, I think. And I remember too reading an interview with a very famous Spanish translator years ago, Gregory Robaza, and he had translated mainly novels, but great novels like 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And his translations of the novels were so great that Marquez thought that he made 100 Years of Solitude a better book than the one he wrote. So, if you have a really good translator who translates the spirit and, shows great ability, you can make a masterpiece out of it that is at least the equal of in the original language. It's not the same book, because there will be differences.
That's also one of the deformities that Berman talks about, improvement. And it happens.
Yeah.
You make a translation that's better than the original. You've actually, in a way, ruined the original, even though it's better.
Yeah.
And,
You have to accept, I think Donny's right. You cannot translate a language literally.
Well, even a literal translation deforms it.
Sure,
every method you use, you lose something.
Yeah. So you have to make choices.
Yeah, it's a matter of choices. And if you want your choices then to be published, it's a matter of knowing the conventions of your readership. And as long as you accept that those aren't universal, maybe you're going to be good enough translator to change the conventions. You can push them. The idea of readability is very important in English. Even if you have a poem, say in Turkish, that Turks have trouble reading, English readers will expect it to be translated into something they don't have trouble reading.
The Ottoman poetry.
And Ottoman poetry.
Like in 19th century, who was that translated all the Ottoman?
Gibb?
Yeah, Gibb. You read his stuff, and it is so 19th century.
It's very bad.
But it is within the conventions of its time.
It sounds like Tennyson.
Yeah, exactly. And you read it now, and you read it for curiosity.
Yeah.
To see what they were doing. I don't think it was very accurate, but, they had these ideas that, if it's classical Ottoman, it must look like English in this way. And, no, it didn't. But it's one of the deformities, like, Donny's talking about, and we have other ones these days and other conventions. because conventions are always created within a time. I like to think the new conventions give a certain amount more accuracy and readability, actually. I like
one of the things that I struggle with Lale Muldur is she's not so readable in Turkish. She's difficult in Turkish. And how much difficulty can I get away with in English and still be published and still be read?
It's like Ece Ayhan.
Yeah, Ece Ayhan's another good example. How much can you make him, how much of his difficulty can you bring over and still be read?
And were you successful in that, do you think?
No, I try.
Yeah, it's another deformity, but
Yeah.
it still may be better.
Contentment is not the lot of good
No.
artists or good translators.
Your translations are never good enough.
Yeah. You wanted to be content, you should have taken a job at the Renault dealership.
Yeah. Ditch digging, I hear, is very satisfying.
Very satisfying in a very direct way.
Talking about concepts such as translatability, let us now discuss the ways in which translation theories influence translation. Donny, what do you think about translation theories, particularly in terms of their moral aspects?
Well,
You already talked about this.
yeah. If it helps you get away from, if it unblocks you from your work, it's good. The idea of deformity really helped me. The ideas of convention, realizing that, oh, the way that my readers want me to translate is just a convention. I don't have to translate like that. I can. If I want lots of readers, I can translate like that. If I don't want readers, I'll translate the way I want. That it's not, I'm not breaking any rules by doing this. I can do what I want. I just have to realize, oh, conventions, there are conventions, there's the possibilities of translating, and you're always going to ruin something. Okay, you can accept that. But if you actually take, say, Walter Benjamin's Task of the Translator and actually try to apply what he says about translation literally to a translation, it will be unreadable. You will be very frustrated. Your readers won't know what you're doing. And actually, if you read Walter Benjamin's translations, he didn't follow his own rules anyway. So, yeah, if you read Derrida on translation again, you'll be very frustrated with your life. But it helps you think. It helps you think about things, even if it isn't a rule book. It's not a rule book. But it will help you think about these difficult problems.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, theory is interesting to read, and you can learn from it.
But it's not a rule book.
But it's not a rule book. Yeah, people who think that their theory can match reality. It's pretty rigid. And I don't know. I've seen a lot of theorists break their own rules when they were moved to, just because it didn't work for what they were doing, and making what they were doing work was more important than the theory itself.
Yeah. So you can live with it, but not by it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's very good.
it's very nice.
Yeah.
My next question, can you name any particular works of literary translation that qualify as good translations? I mean, this question is a bit weird.
Donny Smith's Lale Muldur,
I don't know.
excellent translation of a difficult writer. Okay.
I'm not satisfied with it, though.
Well, that's all right. Nobody asked you.
Yeah. There are several good translations of the Bible. What's his name? I think it's Franz Rosenzweig. Martin Buber in German did very strange translation of the Jewish Bible. Franz Rosenzweig, I think that's his name.
Yeah,
is trying to recreate that work in English. The Strange German of Martin Buber, translated from Hebrew into English through the German, via the German. It's good work. It makes you see the Bible in a new way, but it's also very literal. And it pays close attention, unlike most Bible translation, it pays close attention to sound and the importance of sound to meaning. It's usually something that's left out of almost all translations. It's like consonants and vowels matter.
They do. And what do you think?
I mean, I read a book, when I read something and I like the translation, I know it. I was reading the poems of Oktay Rifat by Ruth Christie and Christie and McCann, and I couldn't tell whether it was Oktay Rifat or their translation, but there was something that was kind of slow about it, the way they had translated it. It was like it was moving. The text wasn't moving very quickly. I don't know whether it was my mood, like I wanted something that moved more quickly, or the text seemed to be kind of slow, but it was not really satisfying. Okay, and I'm not down on them, and I don't know enough to check it against the Turkish, or I didn't have Turkish, but that was not my most satisfying translation. I did read the Enes Batur with Cliff and Salhan and that whole gang, and actually I liked it despite my biases, and I thought that they had really worked it into poems that were readable and worked well in English, and I remember there were translations of Edip Cansever. Dirty August, I think it was.
The Tillinghast.
Yeah, Tillinghast family. Richard and what's her name?
Julia.
Yeah. Anyway, that was pretty satisfying. But the writers who parts of Orhan Pamuk have been incredibly satisfying. I thought that My Name Is Red was really a good translation and really worked really well in English. It was actually my favorite, I think, but maybe the book was itself. Other Turkish writers. There's a good translation by Mutlu Konak and Randy Blasing of Nazim Hikmet, and it's good. It really moves. It has the right idea of the long lines and the breaks, and that modernist tradition moving through Hikmet's work. I like it, actually. But those are just a few things. I like my friend Danny Borzutsky's translations from the Chilean of some of the Chilean poets.
That reminds me, I've just got Franz Wright's translations from Rilke.
Oh yeah,
James Wright's.
Yeah, James
nice.
Wright's a great
James
writer.
Wright's translations are great, and his son's translations are great.
Franz Wright's his son. Yeah.
And we were talking, not you, but we were talking earlier about song translation, and those really amaze me. That anyone can make words fit music.
Yeah, my next question is about music.
Yeah,
Well, ask the question then. Let's see where we go.
It is firstly for you, Jeff. We know that you used to be a musician and you are interested in musicology, music cultures and traditions. Could you compare and or contrast songwriting and poetry writing, song translation and poetry translation?
Well, I think that my a couple of points when we were talking about this earlier was that poetry comes out of this very much oral tradition originally. If you look at like great books on epic poetry, like Singer of Tales from about 1930, talking about Balkan epic poetry, and you realize that the rhyming endings were a mnemonic device so that people could better remember these long poems. And in fact, it helps. I mean, that's why people can remember songs often when they can't remember poetry, because for a long time, poets and musicians whether you're talking about ballads or various different poems or Kipling's barracks ballads. You relied on these endings to memorize. Well, it's changed dramatically in our time because functions have changed so much. For instance, before photography, painting, people relied on painting for transmitting a visual imagery. Even in the Ottoman Empire, there was that tradition of miniatures, and you had the minorities painting and things like this. But when photography comes, everything changes. Because not only does the painting function in the West, for instance, especially, but also here, become more obsolete because you can take a photo and get a better image of who the person is. Well, in a sense, you get a better image. You also have people all of a sudden in all kinds of houses, all kinds of religions, hanging pictures on the wall of their families. Okay, one of the things I noticed in the Syrian war was you go into a destroyed house and somewhere there's a picture of the family. Everybody's got them, regardless of the prohibitions in Islam against visual imagery, as is. And so what happens to visual imagery? Well, visual imagery starts to look in different directions. You get painting moving to impressionism or conceptualization. It moves into conceptualization. And you get conceptual art now, and you get all these different kinds of ways to use painting. In some ways, it frees these visual arts from being forced to work in that specific tradition. Photography, on the other hand, gets the best of both worlds. It can both be an art form and it can be a way of transmitting the life of your family. Well, the same's true of poetry. Poetry serves this function of, ballads and songs and so forth until the, early 20th century. And suddenly, because we have different ways of compiling knowledge, books become easier to get, printing and all the other things. It doesn't rely on verbal transmission anymore. It's freeing itself from those same traditions, the way that photography freed other art forms, visual art forms, from having to rely on portraiture. Okay, so suddenly you get these great poems that are free verse and are often very visual, like Apollinaire working on the whole page with an image, or Ezra Pound putting Chinese characters on his cantos. This idea of a sound-based in the art becomes visual. And so now we look towards the visual more, okay, in poetry. We are freed from having line lengths and constraining it to music and so forth. We choose our forms, okay? And this is even more so with the computers, because computers contain so much knowledge. How many people are memorizing poems? No one, right? Because there's always more stuff.
Or you can just, there it is. It's on my
right. I can look it up online. It's unless you're an actor. Now, actors and actresses still have to memorize, and so they are the keepers of that truth in a way. I had to when I was acting, but we don't have to anymore. So we're freed from that, and this is true of. It's a loss. Again, it's a malformation of our age, and it's also what our age is at the same time. So we just have a different road. Now, lyrics, when you're talking about for songs, they're still constrained, you see. They're constrained by the music in which they're placed in. So the music goes along, and the structure, it continues. It's still traditional in some ways. I mean, if I read, if you listen to even Turkish music based on some, Mediterranean faux American form like Shakira or something, there's a certain basis to it based on the beat. Okay, if you look at a more folk-oriented form, Bob Dylan, is incredible lyricist. Well, not for every song. There's some terrible songs, but there's some really great songs too. And but they're still, they're still in the form. God said to Abraham, kill me a son. Abraham said, you must be putting me on. God said no. Abe said what? God said, you must do what you want to, but next time you see me, you better run. And God says, where you want this killing done? Said, down on Highway 61. Now, that's an old song by Dylan, but you can see how it all works as a sound-based thing. And that's one of the great attractions, of course, of music. And when I used to play music, I used to love that, because you're combining that great sound with those lyrics of whatever they are, and they don't always rhyme in music, but they always have that. In popular music, you have that thread. Now, if you're talking about experimental classical music or something, forget it. That's different. What do you think?
Well, I was thinking while you were talking of the Ajda Pekkan song, Bu Benim Dünyam. Like, this is my world. Do you know it?
No, but please.
Well, you do know it, though. Because it's the... it was a big hit in the 80s. We Don't Need Another Hero. It was Bonnie Taylor, I think.
I'm sorry,
Bonnie Tyler.
I'm not really up on Bonnie Tyler, but you'll have to accept my apology.
You might have been in Turkey.
No. I probably thought I was too hip for it.
Anyway, like they took this American hit song, which probably may have been an Italian hit song. I don't remember who wrote it. Big hit in America. They translated it into Turkish. The lyrics have nothing to do with each other. We don't need another hero. Bu benim dünyam. But the tone, the overall tone of both is the same. It's very defiant. I'm a woman who you're not gonna mess with. Yeah. So, and it fits. The Turkish lyrics fit perfectly. It's great. I mean, especially Ajda Pekkan's early career, they took all these French chansons and translated them into Turkish. Very nice work. But the song's topics aren't always the same. The mood, though, is usually the same. And that amazes me. I haven't really studied it much, but I would like to.
I didn't know you're such a big Ajda Pekkan fan.
I'm not, but I like the old Yeşilçam, the old nostalgia.
Oh, yeah. No, they're pretty fun.
Yeah.
They are. I like the ones with gangsters. Lanet olsun.
Well, they're legendary. And last but definitely not least, any advices for inexperienced but enthusiastic literary translators? Sorry.
If you can work with a living author and actually work with them, it'll make your life a lot easier. Working with someone that you don't ever meet is hard, and working with someone dead is very hard.
They make difficult collaborators. You keep on asking them questions.
No one answers.
No one answers.
Yeah.
They don't send letters to you. Yeah. You don't get telegrams.
Yeah.
You don't get Gmail. You don't get Facebook.
And also their errors. They're I don't remember the word for error.
Yeah, cha, maybe. Cha?
Mirasını bırakıyorsun birkaç kişiye adı ne?
Miras legacy?
No, the mirasçılar, the ones who
Varis?
Yes. Yeah. They can be very difficult. Sometimes they want lots of money. And like, sorry, this is poetry. We're not going to make any money. I've had heirs ask me for like $100 per poem. It's like, no, we're not going to make any money off of this. So I'm sorry. I'm throwing everything in the trash. It's not going to happen.
Uchiyor.
Yeah.
Like, oh, his poetry is so valuable. Yeah, Lutfin, yeah.
Yeah.
It was sheer, yeah.
No, I would give them a cut if there was ever a book. Okay, you can have part of the profits, which there won't be any. But
Yeah, they're never going to be profits.
But I could tell them they can have part of the profits. But like, I'm not giving you $100 per poem. That's crazy.
The most money I ever made on a poem was $100.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
Although the one book I did in Argentina,
a couple of times.
I got $2,500 for.
Really?
But it took me 10 years to translate.
Oh, okay. Well,
So
time well spent.
yeah. And I spent most of that on the plane ticket to go there for the
Award ceremony.
for the reading.
Oh,
public
good,
reading.
good. That sounds great.
So you know,
Buenos
that's
Aires.
how. If you want to live as a literary translator, you got to go with novels. Poetry won't get you anything.
Yeah, that's true.
Novels, crime novels are big right now. If you can find a good mystery writer, it's the way to go.
What if your collaborator is dead and you have nothing much to do?
Well, you know, then you gotta just be a genius.
Yeah.
Imagine what they would want you to do.
And create something out of that.
Don't think about what you want. Think about what they might want you to do. If you're translating with someone who's dead or you can't get in touch with or whatever. That's important. It's not, you know, translation, even poetry, but, you know, everybody always thinks about themselves. But it's important to remember it's not what you want, it's what the poem demands. What does the muse demand? There's still a muse in translation. It's just a little different, you know? But it's making demands. And the demands are, yeah, no, you know, which word? Forget it, that word's not going to work.
Maybe this is the problem with translation theory.
What's that?
It's all based on atheist translators who don't believe in the muse.
Yeah, those muse sizzler. Yeah, muse sizzler.
Dean Sizzler.
Yeah. Muse sizzler. See, my pronunciation is crap. But you understand what I'm saying.
I do.
Yeah, good.
That's all. Thank you very much. for
Sure.
joining us.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank my guests again. Today we talked a lot about poetry translation. Until next, see you later.